Have you ever wondered why silence feels so uncomfortable? Why being alone in a room with no messages, no voices, no one waiting for you, feels like suffocation instead of freedom? It's not just emptiness, it's withdrawal. Not from the world, but from the emotional addiction you didn't even realize you had. Most people aren't afraid of being alone. They're terrified of facing what surfaces when the noise fades. The moment everything gets quiet, you're left with yourself. And that's exactly where the real confrontation begins. Some people walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. They don't argue, they don't chase, they don't explain. They disappear, and everything changes. The energy shifts. People start asking questions, wondering what's wrong, wondering where they went, and the ones who thought they had control begin to feel lost. What would happen if you did the same? What would happen if you stopped responding right away, not just to messages, but to emotional triggers? What would happen if you chose silence instead of justifying yourself? If you simply removed yourself when your presence was being taken for granted? We've been conditioned to believe that our value comes from availability. Be ready, be nice, be needed, be useful. But what no one told you is that this constant accessibility is not love. It's a contract you never signed. A contract that says, I'll show up no matter how it makes me feel, just so I don't lose anyone. And every time you follow that rule, a part of you disappears. Carl Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So think about it. When you start to withdraw, who gets angry? Who tries to pull you back in? Who suddenly pays attention? Those reactions say more about them than about you. But they also reveal something deeper. How much of your behavior is still being manipulated without your awareness? Because let's be honest, how many times have you responded to avoid guilt? How many times have you said yes just to maintain peace? How many times have you laughed, agreed, stayed, just to keep someone close who never truly saw you? And you know what happens at the end of those days? You lie in bed, staring at the ceiling with that heavy, invisible exhaustion. The one you can't explain, the one that doesn't come from your job or your body, but from your soul. That's not fatigue, that's depletion. That's your spirit telling you that you gave too much of yourself to people who didn't deserve your presence, let alone your emotions. And here's where it all flips. Silence is not passive. It's powerful, especially when it comes from awareness, not avoidance. When you stop showing up just to be accepted, when you stop reacting to every emotional poke, when you stop explaining yourself every time someone misunderstands you, you don't become cold, you become free. You see, the world doesn't know what to do with someone it can't predict. People are used to pushing your buttons and getting a reaction, and the day you stop reacting, the game ends. You break the cycle. You stop being a mirror for their insecurities. You stop being the emergency switch they hit when they want comfort. That's why your absence causes more noise than your words ever did. It's why your silence makes them question themselves. Because when you remove your energy from a space, people are forced to face their own. And most of them don't like what they see. You were the buffer, the distraction, the emotional crutch. But let's get one thing clear. This isn't about turning your back on the world. It's about turning toward yourself. About remembering who you are underneath all the masks you've worn to be accepted. About recognizing that your constant accessibility has become a subtle form of self-abandonment, a silent betrayal of your own peace. If this message resonated with your journey, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear where you are on this path. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking through these truths together. And no one tells you how deeply this betrayal cuts until the day you finally stop. The first time you don't respond, the first time you walk away without explaining, the first time you leave a message on read because your peace mattered more than the perception others have of you. That's the moment you feel it, guilt, doubt, that inner voice that says, maybe I'm being too distant, maybe I'm pushing people away, maybe I'll end up alone, and maybe you will. But for the first time, it will be your choice. Not because they left, but because you stopped begging them to stay. We've been taught since childhood that love must be earned, that you only deserve connection if you're useful, available, agreeable. That's why you shrink yourself. That's why you apologize for your needs. That's why you explain your silence like it's a crime. But here's what they never told you. What you're calling love is often just survival, a trauma response in disguise. Because true love doesn't require you to abandon yourself. The individuation process Jung spoke of is not some mystical idea. It's the brutal, sacred act of peeling off every layer you built just to be accepted. It's choosing to be whole instead of approved. And that journey starts the moment you sit in silence and don't run. The moment you feel the panic rise and still don't reach for your phone. The moment you're misunderstood and you don't rush to defend yourself. The moment you look around and realize no one is coming to save you, and that's not tragic, it's transformative. Because silence, when chosen, becomes sovereignty, a language of its own, not empty, but full of presence. The silence of someone who no longer owes anything to anyone. And it's in that silence that you finally begin to hear yourself again. But what happens next? What do you do with the pain that starts to surface? With the loneliness that feels unbearable at first? In the next part, we're going to dive into that exact moment, the one where solitude turns from pain into power. The moment the world goes quiet and no one is calling, texting, needing, or noticing you, something inside starts to ache. Not the kind of ache that comes from missing someone, but the ache of a wound that never had the chance to close. It's the ache of all the times you were overlooked as a child, when you were right there but still invisible. The ache of being around people who loved the version of you that served them, not the one that needed to be held. This is the part of solitude most people aren't ready to face. The part where silence is not peaceful, it's loud, deafening. Because it brings up everything you tried to bury under distractions, under people, under relationships that felt like love, but were just bandages on an open wound. You start to see that maybe you weren't in love with the people you chased. You were in love with the idea of being wanted. You didn't need them, you needed to stop feeling like you didn't matter. Carl Jung believed that our strongest emotional patterns come from unresolved experiences. That we repeat the same pain with different people until we finally choose to face it. And that's what happens when you finally sit with yourself. You realize that the love you've been begging for from others was never meant to come from them in the first place. You were always trying to fill the absence of a nurturing presence you didn't receive when you needed it most. That's why loneliness hurts so much. Not because you're alone, but because you were never taught how to be with yourself. You were raised to believe that love had to come from outside, that being alone meant something was wrong with you, that silence was punishment, that stillness was emptiness. So you kept people around, any people, just to feel like you mattered to someone. But there's a hidden cost to that. Every time you let someone stay just to avoid loneliness, you abandon yourself a little more. You start bending, molding, shrinking just to keep them close. You ignore red flags. You accept crumbs. You over-explain. You try harder. You become less and less of who you are just to be enough for someone who was never truly present. And at some point, you forget who you were before trying to be loved consumed all your energy. That's what unhealed pain does. It convinces you that any connection is better than solitude. That being misunderstood is better than being ignored. That being needed is the same as being loved. And that's why you keep coming back to the same kind of relationships. Different faces, same ache, same script. The one where you keep giving, hoping one day someone will finally see you. But how can they see you if you keep hiding behind the fear of being alone? Jung would call this the shadow. Those hidden parts of us we've suppressed for so long we forgot they even existed. The part of you that believes you're only lovable when you're useful. The part of you that thinks needing love is weakness. The part of you that equates solitude with abandonment instead of wholeness. And the only way to reclaim that part is to face it, gently but directly. So the pain you feel when you're alone, that's not loneliness. That's a part of you knocking from the inside, saying, I've been here all along, can you finally stay and listen? But this is the hardest part, because no one taught you how to stay. You were taught how to chase, how to fix, how to please, how to keep people, but not how to keep yourself. You were shown that value lies in sacrifice, that love means proving your worth, that being chosen by others is more important than choosing yourself. And yet, in the silence, everything starts to shift. You begin to see that you've been playing a game you never agreed to, one where you always have to prove something just to be loved. And when you finally walk away from that game, when you stop chasing, something even deeper begins. Grief. Yes, grief. Not just over the people you've lost, but over the years you lost abandoning yourself to be loved by them, over the masks you wore, the words you swallowed, the tears you hid, the anger you suppressed. You grieve the time you spent waiting to be chosen, not realizing that the person who most needed your love was you. This is where healing begins, not in feeling strong, but in feeling everything. in crying without shame, in remembering that your value was never meant to be earned, that you are not broken just because no one stayed, that your worth does not disappear when the room empties. Because here's the truth that stings before it frees you. Not everyone who leaves was meant to stay, and not everyone you lost was a loss. The ones who disappeared when you stopped giving were only there for the version of you that kept bleeding just to keep them comfortable. That version of you is dying now, and what's being born is someone who no longer begs to be seen. Someone who's learning to look in the mirror without needing permission to exist. Someone who doesn't need validation to feel valuable. And that's not arrogance, that's healing. Because once you realize that your pain is a signal, not a weakness, everything changes. You stop seeing solitude as punishment and start recognizing it as a return to your essence, a reconnection with the child you once were, who needed love and instead got silence. Now in this new silence, you're finally ready to offer that love, not to anyone else, to yourself. But healing is not linear. And just because you've decided to stop begging doesn't mean the urge disappears overnight. There will still be days where you crave a message, a voice, a distraction. That's okay. Don't shame yourself for missing what wasn't real. Don't punish yourself for wanting to be seen. The difference now is that you're aware. You know that chasing love leads to empty hands. That begging for presence leads to more absence. That every time you run from your solitude, you run from the only person who can actually make you whole. And this time, you stop running. So what happens when you truly stay? When you sit with your grief, your loneliness, your ache, and don't reach for someone else to fix it? What emerges when you finally realize that the pain you've been avoiding is your portal to power? That's exactly what we'll explore next. Because once you stop begging for love, the next step is learning how to give it to yourself and reclaim the parts of you that no longer need to be chosen to feel complete. There comes a moment, quiet but undeniable, when you realize that all the love you've been begging for was never going to come from the places you kept looking. That no matter how much you tried, how much you gave, how much of yourself you surrendered, the people you chased couldn't love you the way you needed. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were trying to collect something from people who never had it to give. It's a brutal awakening, the realization that the love you thought you were missing from others was actually the love you had yet to give yourself. Think about how many times you stayed in a conversation that drained you, just to feel connected. How many times you smiled when your soul was collapsing inside, just to keep someone from walking away. How many times you over-explained, overcompensated, and over-apologized just to feel like you mattered. You didn't do it because you were weak. You did it because deep down you were convinced that love had to be earned. But true love never demands that you betray yourself to keep it. Carl Jung often spoke about the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted by the world. It's not inherently wrong. Everyone wears a persona. But when the mask becomes your identity, when you forget who you are beneath the performance, you start to believe that being useful is the same as being loved, that being agreeable is the same as being worthy, and that being chosen by someone else is the same as choosing yourself. That's where the wound begins to rot. Because love that requires you to shrink, to silence yourself, to prove your value over and over again, that's not love. That's survival. And the problem with surviving through others is that you end up dying inside, quietly, slowly, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've disappeared. You're still breathing, still smiling, still functioning, but the light behind your eyes is dim, because you've spent years building a life around the hope that someone would finally see you. But here's the truth. No one can see the real you until you're willing to stop hiding behind the desperation to be loved. This is where most people get stuck, right at the edge of freedom, because choosing yourself feels terrifying when all you've known is choosing others. There's no applause, no one rushes in to validate your growth. In fact, the moment you stop begging is usually the moment people start calling you distant, arrogant, selfish. But that's not because you changed in a negative way, it's because you stopped playing the role they wrote for you, and that threatens their comfort. The version of you that always picked up the phone, always made excuses, always stayed available no matter how you felt. That version was convenient. And when you start saying no, when you stop over-explaining, when you begin protecting your energy, you stop being convenient. You stop being easy to manipulate. You stop being someone they can drain whenever they need validation. And suddenly, they're forced to confront the fact that they never loved you. They loved your compliance, your willingness, your silence. But this shift, this rebellion against emotional slavery, comes with consequences. You'll lose people, and not just toxic ones. Sometimes you'll lose people you genuinely cared about, people you grew with, people who were part of your life for years. But if they only stayed because of what you gave, and not for who you are, then they weren't truly with you. They were with your performance, and that's a hard truth to swallow, because it means you spent years auditioning for roles in someone else's life, hoping they'd finally choose you, when you hadn't yet chosen yourself. But this is not the end. This is the beginning. The moment you stop trying to earn love is the moment you start to experience it. Not in grand gestures or romantic promises, but in simple, quiet acts of self-respect, in the decision to rest instead of overwork, in the choice to stay home when your soul is tired, in the boundary you place, even if it disappoints someone, in the silence you keep instead of defending yourself to people who were never truly listening. Because love isn't something you chase, it's something you become. And becoming love starts with telling yourself the truth, even when it breaks your heart. Like admitting you begged for attention because you were starving for connection. Like acknowledging that you let people treat you poorly because some part of you believed you deserved it. Like realizing that the reason you felt so empty wasn't because people didn't love you, but because you stopped loving yourself to keep them close. But what happens when you finally stop? When you stop chasing, stop begging, stop proving? At first, there's a silence that feels like death. An emptiness so deep it echoes, but if you sit in it, really sit, it begins to change. Slowly, quietly, the silence starts to fill with something new. With you, not the version of you who needs to be needed, but the version who's learning to need nothing but their own presence, the version who doesn't panic when the phone doesn't ring, who doesn't unravel when someone pulls away, who doesn't crumble when they're misunderstood. That version of you, stable, centered, self-honoring, is the one who never begs for love again, because you finally understand that what you give yourself, no one can take away. And this realization isn't just emotional, it's spiritual, it's energetic. You stop vibrating at the frequency of lack. You stop attracting relationships that mirror your desperation. You start moving through the world with a new kind of gravity, one that doesn't scream for attention, but commands respect without a word. Let me know in the comments what part of this video spoke to your soul the most. And if you're ready for more conversations that go beneath the surface, don't forget to hit subscribe. This is the part where you become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because you're no longer leaking energy trying to be chosen. And ironically, it's in this moment of full detachment from external validation that love, the real kind, begins to find its way to you. But here's the challenge. Can you hold that standard when loneliness creeps back in? Can you stay loyal to yourself when someone offers attention wrapped in inconsistency? Can you protect your peace when the old craving for approval returns? That's what we'll explore next. Because choosing yourself once is easy. Choosing yourself again and again, especially when the world tempts you to forget your worth, that's the real mastery. When you stop chasing love, something unexpected begins to happen. The people who once seemed distant start to notice. The ones who ignored your worth begin to question your silence, and those who once took your presence for granted begin to feel the absence they never thought would affect them. It's a strange reversal. You've spent so long trying to be seen, to be chosen, to be enough, and the moment you stop trying, the energy shifts. But this shift isn't magic. It's not manipulation. It's physics, emotional physics. When you pull your energy back, the imbalance becomes visible. People who were used to your emotional availability suddenly feel unstable, not because you punished them, but because they were addicted to the version of you that always gave, always explained, always showed up, no matter how little they offered in return. You see, withdrawal isn't rejection, it's revelation. It shows who was really there for you, and who was only there for what you could give. When you stop being emotionally accessible to everyone, you don't become cruel, you become clear, and clarity has a cost. You lose the false safety of codependent relationships. You lose the illusion that pleasing others will protect you. But what you gain is everything. Because the moment you start choosing your peace over their comfort, you step into your power. You've probably noticed how people react when you start saying no, how they get irritated when you no longer explain yourself, how they try to guilt trip you when you choose silence over justification. That's not love. That's control dressed in emotional dependency. They don't miss you. They miss what they could extract from you. Carl Jung believed that energy is the foundation of all psychological interactions. Every reaction, every impulse, every emotional exchange, it's energy moving from one person to another. And when you begin to control that flow, when you decide who gets access to your time, your attention, your vulnerability, people feel it. Not everyone will like it, especially those who benefited from your exhaustion. Let me ask you something. How many times have you answered a message just to avoid someone getting mad? How many times have you gone to an event you didn't want to attend just to keep the peace? How many times have you smiled through discomfort, hoping to avoid conflict? Every one of those moments was a transaction. You gave up a part of your presence in exchange for someone else's approval. But here's the truth. The more you give from a place of self-abandonment, the less others value what you offer. Because what's always available becomes disposable. That's why your absence matters more than your presence ever did. Not because silence is louder, but because people finally notice what they were never truly grateful for. Your attention, your presence, your care, they were never meant to be automatic. They were meant to be earned. This is the beginning of becoming rare, of no longer being emotionally cheap, of realizing that your soul was never supposed to be an open buffet for whoever needed emotional validation. You are not an emotional service provider. You are a human being with limits. And when you start honoring those limits, you stop being used as someone else's emotional emergency button. It's uncomfortable at first. You'll feel the urge to go back, to answer, to explain, to soften your boundary just a little bit, but resist that pull. Because every time you hold your ground, you're teaching the world how to treat you. You're showing people that your energy is not a guarantee, that access to your heart comes with responsibility, and slowly everything changes. You no longer attract people who feed off your insecurities. You no longer tolerate relationships built on your silence. You start walking into rooms not wondering who will like you, but knowing that whoever resonates with your truth will stay, and whoever doesn't was never meant to. This is how dignity is built, one boundary at a time. But don't be surprised if people accuse you of changing. They'll say you're distant now, that you're cold, that you've become selfish. But what they're really saying is, you stopped playing the role I assigned you. And yes, you did. You stopped being the fixer, the pleaser, the always available. And in that decision, you reclaimed your identity. Because when you stop being a reflection of other people's expectations, you start becoming a mirror for their discomfort. Your silence becomes threatening. Your calm becomes disruptive. Your peace becomes a rebellion. And that's when you'll know you've stepped into something deeper than emotional independence. You've stepped into sovereignty. People often think power is loud, that it looks like control, domination, confrontation. But the most powerful people aren't the ones who shout. They're the ones who can sit in silence and still be heard, who can say no with a look, who can walk away without a word and change the entire dynamic. That's the power of self-ownership, of emotional maturity, of inner stillness. And the more you embody it, the more you realize that you were never supposed to be available for everyone. That your heart was never meant to be accessed on demand. That your time, your presence, your emotional energy, they're sacred. And the moment you start treating them that way, the world responds. Some will be repelled. They'll call you heartless. Others will be drawn in with awe. But most importantly, you will feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace that comes from avoiding conflict. The peace that comes from standing in your truth, even if it makes others uncomfortable. That's the peace of someone who no longer needs to be understood to feel whole. But this isn't the final destination. This is only the transformation. Because now that you've stepped into your power, there's a new challenge ahead. Can you stay in this alignment when it gets lonely? Can you hold your peace when others beg you to return to your old self? Can you remain emotionally sovereign when the world still rewards self-abandonment? That's the test we'll face next. Because true freedom doesn't begin when you set a boundary. It begins when you refuse to break it, even when your heart is aching. And now you arrive at the final threshold, the one that most people never cross. You've learned to stop chasing, to sit with your loneliness, to choose yourself, and to pull back your energy. But there's one more lesson waiting for you, one more test of the soul, because after the withdrawal, after the grief, after the silence comes the space. And in that space, you'll feel something you didn't expect. Peace, yes, but also a strange kind of weightlessness. A sense of disconnection from everything that once anchored you. This is where most people turn back, because choosing yourself in moments of pain is one thing. Choosing yourself when everything is quiet, when no one is watching, when no one is validating, when no one is coming to rescue you, that requires a deeper level of devotion, not to others, to your own inner truth. You'll notice something strange. People stop calling. Conversations dry up. You begin to feel invisible. But this time you don't crumble. You start to understand that what feels like isolation is actually realignment. The universe isn't punishing you. It's protecting you from the noise that once drowned your voice. It's making room. Room for the version of you that doesn't need to explain their silence. Room for the part of you that no longer needs to be understood to be worthy. Room for the self you buried beneath years of pleasing, proving, chasing. You'll begin to sense it. A new kind of strength. Not loud, not aggressive, but steady, quiet, immovable. It's the strength of someone who knows they could speak, but chooses not to. Someone who could fight, but no longer needs to, because there is nothing left to defend, no role left to perform, no audience left to satisfy. Carl Jung said, "Solitude is not the absence of love, but its complement." And maybe for the first time, you begin to understand that, because now, being alone isn't lonely. It's sacred. It's the place where your thoughts aren't filtered through fear, where your decisions are no longer made from desperation, where your presence finally belongs to you. This is the solitude of the strong, the silence that rebuilds you, the stillness that reconnects you, the quiet that heals you in ways noise never could. I read every single comment. Your story matters. Tell me below what this video awakened in you. And if you're on a journey of healing and self-reclamation, subscribing means we stay connected for every step ahead. And here's where something miraculous begins. You no longer look at people with hunger. You look with clarity. You no longer approach relationships asking, will they love me? Instead, you ask, will they honor the peace I've worked so hard to build? That's when the dynamic shifts forever. You stop being a seeker of affection and become a guardian of your energy. You no longer allow love that costs you your dignity. You no longer tolerate connection that demands your silence. You don't enter spaces where you have to beg to be understood. You walk away with grace, not because you don't care, but because you finally do. And here's something else no one tells you. When you reach this level of self-possession, you become rare. Not because you're untouchable, but because you are finally whole. And wholeness is rare in a world built on emptiness. You'll find that fewer people can access you, but those who do will feel something unshakable in your presence. A calm, a clarity, a gravity that cannot be faked. You are no longer chasing, you are attracting. Not because you're playing a game, but because you've become someone who doesn't need to win love. You are love, and that is what changes everything. But even now, even at this stage, you'll still be tested. Life will still offer you old patterns dressed in new disguises. You'll still be tempted by familiar dynamics. People will return not because they've changed, but to see if you have. And this is where the real freedom lies. In not reacting, in holding your standard, in honoring the version of yourself that had the courage to walk through the fire and not look back. So when you feel that old ache rise again, that pull to prove, to chase, to soften your truth for connection, pause, breathe. Remind yourself of the silence that healed you, of the solitude that rebuilt you, of the peace you now protect like sacred ground. Because this is no longer about loneliness. This is about liberation. You are no longer a prisoner of your past. You are no longer defined by who stayed or who left. You are no longer shaped by who couldn't love you. You are shaped now by your own inner knowing, by the stillness inside you that no longer shakes in the face of rejection. And if you've made it this far, you've already done what most people never dare to do. You've chosen truth over comfort, solitude over performance, integrity over approval. And for that, I honor you. Thank you for walking through this with me. And now, if this message has touched something deep in you, if you felt seen, understood, awakened, there's something waiting for you in the next chapter. A video is already on the screen, and it continues this journey. Don't stop now. Click it. Keep going. You've come too far to turn back now. Let's go even deeper together.